Hello Internet, my name is Martin and welcome back to Teardrop Trailer Building. This video is going to be kind of a cluster of different topics because at this point in time I've really kind of gotten sick and tired of making videos and just as tired of editing them really. So this is going to be a bit of epoxy work, a bit of painting, a bit of electrical, almost to the point of the finished product basically. So there's a few steps at this point in time of the the build process. I kind of wanted to get it ready for painting and whatnot prior to it getting too cold in the winter. It didn't end up happening, but that was kind of the goal here. It just mostly, I think, a big delay happened because of the axle. So now with the axle, it's still too late, but I can start to at least do some of the epoxy work necessary and get the underside completed. So this is just a waterproof coating on the underside, and then also getting the fenders in place so that at least the whole thing can be moved around, because I really didn't want to try and drive it somewhere without fenders on it. It just would have been a disaster. So the fenders here are being welded in place. I was happy with the placement, but in the end I actually ended up cutting the fenders off because you can't access the paint on the back side of the fenders if the fender's in the way. So before I actually took the thing down to be painted, I ended up cutting the fenders off and then putting in new angle iron and then bolts so the whole fenders can be removed. And it really turned out to be handy in the future too, because the fenders tend to decumulate chips from rocks and things like that, and it's really nice to be able to take the fenders off of the trailer without having to paint and worry about painting the trailer itself with the black spray paint. The whole entire trailer was done with black spray paint. It's a high gloss enamel, high temperature stuff. It's about $7 a can, but it ended up working out pretty good. The welds here, there's a piece of plate metal that I welded on top here to close it off. Like I said, it all got cut off anyway later on. But the enamel, or the gloss enamel spray paint, ended up turning out to be really good, just because I didn't want to have to dork with the whole powder coating thing. If I had the chance, what I kind of would say, it's a hell of a lot easier to not build your own trailer, because you can usually get one that's nicely powder coated and it'll handle chips and whatnot better. And you don't have to worry about, oops, I missed a spot like here. So in the end, though, the gloss was really nice looking. You can see yourself in the reflection basically. At this point now, I'm starting to put the sheathing on the side. The sheathing is all done with brad nails that are about 1.5 inches long, because all my studs are 1.5 inches deep. I picked a nail that is kind of like it's ribbed almost, so it would hold in place. Not that super critical, because the whole thing's going to get epoxied over, but just looking down the side, you can kind of see that even though they're small nail heads, they still pull the whole thing in real strongly, especially anywhere there's glue underneath the plywood here against the foam insulation, and so all of that is going to have to get epoxied and bonded in and smooth, because otherwise you're going to see those things showing up. But the whole entire sheathing process was pretty straightforward, starting from the front and then basically moving all the way towards the back. Lots of glue, lots of clamps. Hooray, Harbor Freight for having cheap clamps, basically. Don't expect them to last a long time, but when you need 50 clamps to be able to do something and you're paying $2 a clamp, it's perfect. Here I'm just starting to build the battery box, or the front trailer box, and now it's done. Ta-da! It's basically just a plywood box held together with brad nails, and then the whole thing is epoxied over with fiberglass and a polyester resin. The single door side cutout was also something that I ended up changing. I ended up doing a door on both sides. Here I've left the tail end. You can kind of see I've left the plywood long so that I could trim it off later on to the exact length that I needed, so I could have just the right amount of overlap. In the end, I actually used a piece of aluminum angle iron on that as well to add some extra waterproofedness. This is kind of a dull slideshow. It's what I've got. Like I said, wasn't really into making video at this point. Just started bondoing things up, and really it took a lot of Bondo and it took a lot of epoxy resin. Yeah, and a lot of sanding. So at this point, fall was really starting to settle in, and I needed a place to store the trailer during the winter because I couldn't work on the trailer doing epoxy work during the winter because it was going to be too cold. But I wanted to have the garage back, plus when you do epoxy work in the garage, it had a tendency to stink up the whole entire house. So I ended up building this shelter to house it during the winter, just out of 1x3 furring strips. Of course, I built the shelter, and it really wasn't that good of a shelter. After, I would say, about 1 or 2 good windstorms in February time frame, it did exactly what you would expect it would have done. But at least then by this point in February, I could actually find an off-the-shelf commercial canopy or carport, because when I built it, I just couldn't find one. They just weren't anywhere available. So I'm so done with epoxy. I don't want to ever see epoxy ever again in my life. So at this point, this is one of the few videos I actually have of construction later on, but at this point, I've already put the epoxy on. There's a lot of drips that need to be sanded down, so it was a lot of sanding. And I mean a lot of sanding. And then even then, what I really would have done, looking back, is used lots of Bondo. Because this was a lot of, oh, I found a pit because I sanded through too far, or something like that. So now I got to apply Bondo. You can see here more Bondo, even after drying it off. And then you get more sanding, and more sanding, and more sanding, and more Bondo, and more sanding. And it would have been a lot easier to have just started with, let's Bondo everything. Fiberglass is a pain in the butt, and you really kind of don't want to sand all the way through into that fiberglass weave. So you'd be better off just kind of giving it a rough sanding first time around and then just Bondoing the crap out of everything. You might think there's a lot of Bondo on this. There's not enough. Anywhere here where you see the Bondo, it came out looking good. Anywhere there isn't Bondo, came out looking, not so great. In the end, like I said, it's a lot of sanding, it's a lot of work, and I just got really sick and tired of it. Because you're going to have to sand every single square inch in order to make it look good. But in the end, you do end up having something that looks reasonably smooth. You can see here I haven't removed all the Bondo off of it, but I've got it taped up now, and we're getting ready to paint it. I had a buddy of mine who was working on restoring an 84 Subaru Brat, actually, and he wanted to redo the paint, but he wanted some more practice before he would painting his car. So I said, hey, I need a trailer that needs painting. You want to help me with that? He goes, sure, let's paint it. So I brought it down to Lapine to his place, and took an afternoon, kind of morning. It heated up. It's amazing how you need these temperatures in order to work on things, and it's either too hot or it's too damn cold. But in the end, even with a little bit of flashing because it was warming up, it came out looking out pretty dang good. This is just with the base coat at this point, so it hasn't even fully gotten the gloss in it. But after a few clear coat, we had the primer coat, base coat, and then 2 or 3 clear coats, I want to say. It ended up looking really good. But if you look here closely at some of these pictures, you can still see a few of the little areas of imperfection there where it's not quite perfectly smooth or something like that. So in the end, I'm still happy with how it came out. It's a paint finish that is not going to rot. It's not going to leak. It's not going to crack. It is UV stable. the high reflectivity of the silver paint really helps keep the heat out, basically. And one of the funny things out of this whole entire experience was picking the silver paint to be used, because I knew I wanted a metallic silver flake paint. So I went to the industrial finishing, they sell all the car paints and stuff. I said, I want a silver paint. And they go, okay, which one? And I'm like, what do you mean? I just want a silver metallic flake. And the guy hands me this binder 4 inches thick of nothing but cards of different silvers. And that's just the silver book. That's not the gold book or this other book. No, that's the silver book. But in the end, I picked one after about an hour looking at it in the sun and everything else. It came out with a really nice finish. So here I am just finishing up some of the finishing touches. Just putting the last little touches on the... We'll start here. Just putting the last little touches here on the Fantastic fan. And all I'm doing here is I've got a little tiny bit of silicone, not a huge amount, that I'm priming each hole with. And in the end, this won't matter too much because I'm going to put the ProFlex RV around here. This is just a standard tube of silicone sealant that I had left over. But what I'm going to do is make sure that I get a nice little gushing out of putty tape. Each time I do this. Obviously, before you screw these things in, see, you want to make sure that if this is the front of your trailer, that your hinge is over here, because the wind is going to go this way. Otherwise, you'll catch your lid, potentially. So I've just got a few more to do here. Well, if I can get a good stand going here. But oopsie. I'm not doing it too tight, just enough to cause the putty tape to goosh out a little bit. There we go. Alright, now clean up the excess, because it's going to look ugly otherwise. And so you can see there's putty tape pushing out of this thing. So the putty tape is going to be part of the screw anyway going down into it. So realistically, it's going to be very well sealed up, even if I didn't put the ProFlex on there. But just to be safe, I'm going to put ProFlex on each of these. And then once I've used a plastic spatula to trim away the excess putty tape, I'll go around with a ProFlex all the way around. And that sucker will never leak. This thing will fall apart before it leaks. So here I've just got the little bit of sealant on there as well. The back is not finished in this particular case, but everything else has basically been finished at this point. Need to put the trim on at this point. However, the lighting is easy enough to do, so just after shrink wrapping the electrical connections, using the same butyl tape that I used for the windows and everything else, just get them on. The bare wood you see is actually where the tape was. It's actually still epoxied and everything. Then you just use a spudge, a plastic blade to remove the leftover butyl tape. The electrical at this point is exactly as it is now. Simply a Group 29 battery, an inverter, fuse box, and a cutoff switch. Getting ready to paint the interior, just using a clear polyurethane stain. Can't say I would recommend that again in the future, just because it was so stinky, and I think even now, a year afterwards, it's still off-gassing a little bit. It's looking good though. It's basically ready for its first outing. It's got the solar panel attached, it's got the windows, latches, the interior is looking good, all the light fixtures are in place. I do have another video basically that I want to make as far as just the electricals go. But at this point, this is actually it being used on its first maiden voyage out to Fremont Wainema Forest in May of 2021. Anyway, that's the video. There's maybe one more coming in after this. The whole trailer weighs about 1,000 pounds at this point. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the last Teardrop video